and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to The Future is Female. This is the show where we find the extraordinary in every woman. I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Ann Francke, who is the CEO, Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, which is Britain's professional body for management and leadership. She is the author of Create a Gender-Balanced Workplace, and in 2020, she was awarded an OBE for services for workplace equality. I'm delighted to have her on the show, and thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you, Melissa, for asking me.
I would love to hear a little bit more about yourself first, and your role at CMI, but also how you came to be in this line and be so passionate about advocating for better workplaces for everyone.
Sure. Well, so I started my career at Procter & Gamble. I was very fortunate to start that after I finished my university, my MBA. That was in the US. And I have to say, for the first several years of my career, I worked in what I would describe as gender-balanced workplaces. And when I became a middle manager, I had a tough time personally. I was going through a divorce. And it became absolutely essential for me to take my daughter to school. So I went to my boss, a male boss, and I said, you know what? I'm going to be late for your 9 o'clock meeting. He had one every day at 9 because I have to take my daughter to school. And I'm really sorry, but that's non-negotiable. And now you have to remember this was a couple of decades ago. And he looked at me and he said, no problem, just come late to the meeting. Now, of course, the first few days I was walking in 9:30 instead of 9, red-faced, embarrassed. But, you know, I got used to it, and so did everyone else. So what did I do? I paid that forward. That meant that I was managing about 14 people at that time, young men as well as women, very talented people. I decided if I was going to be allowed to flex my work around my life and caring commitments, I was going to let them do that. They weren't single parents like me. They were maybe sports aficionados. One played in an orchestra. One liked to go out clubbing, so, you know, start late, end late. But I let them fit their work around their lifestyle. And all of a sudden, I got a call from the headquarters of Procter & Gamble. And that call was from the top person in HR. And they said, you know, we've noticed you're getting exceptional results in terms of market share and in terms of growth. What are you doing? And I said, well, I have a gender-balanced team and I'm allowing them to fit their work around their lifestyle. That made me a real advocate for this, Melissa. But then as my own career advanced and I got to the C-suite, I looked around, I noticed fewer and fewer women until I was the only one, in many situations the first and only female. And I will be honest, that was quite uncomfortable. The culture was very different. People did not feel able, perhaps I certainly didn't feel able to bring my best self. I felt quite held back. And that's when I realized, you know, I looked the way people were treating each other and I thought, you know, these are not my values. So I realized the importance of having a gender-balanced workplace and also the detriment of not having one. And that really turned me into an advocate. I decided that latterly in my career, I wanted to do something to change that. And that is why I became the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute.
And has it been difficult to advocate for this? I mean, I think at this point in 2024, we've all heard the phrase gender equality. We have DIE initiatives in the workplace, but has it been difficult? Has there been pushback and resistance to trying to change culture, change mindsets, change institutions and legacies and structures?
So the simple answer to that, Melissa, is yes. And what I've observed, and we do a lot of work on this at CMI and also not just me personally, but my institute, what we've noticed is there's a huge amount of talk about gender equality. And this is actually pretty much a global phenomenon.
Yeah. every International Women's Day.
Yes.
And it's just talk.
Well, there you go. You've said it. So what we call this at CMI, and we've done research into this, we call it the say-do gap. So almost every organization nowadays in its annual report and on its website says, of course we champion gender equality, all sorts of equality, you know, gender, racial, etc. But then when you ask people, so 90% of people will say, of course we champion those things. But then when you ask them, okay, so what do you do about it? And less than half can name anything that they personally or their company is doing about it. We call this the say-do gap. So we do far more talking than we do acting. And the result of this, Melissa, is that because we've done so much talking, there's now backlash. So for example, up to 1/3 of men say, we've done far too much for gender equality in the workplace. But the data does not support this. Because in many, many countries, it's not moving forward, or it's stagnant, or in some cases, even moving backwards.
So how do you measure that a company, that any organization is not just talk, is actually doing? Are there metrics and ways, beyond, say, just the quantity, that we can think about really doing gender-balanced workplaces and doing it well?
Yes, there are many things that we can do, and some of these involve data and processes. But the most important thing, and we've just done a very recent piece of research on this as well, the most important thing is the culture you create. But let me start with some of the data that you can capture, because of course data is very important. We manage what we measure, and you know, what gets managed gets measured, what gets measured gets done. So goes the adage, doesn't always work. So when it comes to measuring gender progress, I advocate to pay attention to really a couple of metrics. The first is, take a look at your organization and divide it up into quartiles, right? You know, the top 25%, the next, and the bottom 25%. Most organizations have what I call a glass pyramid when it comes to gender. What do I mean? Well, and this is true in many countries, including Malaysia, many more young women are getting better educations, they're getting better degrees, often they get better grades. So of course they get these great jobs, and they're in that bottom quartile. And I have heard so many managers and CEOs say, no problem, half my intake now at the graduate level is female. Right. And they think job done. This is where the glass pyramid comes in. You have to measure how many of that 50% in that bottom quartile are getting promoted to the next quartile, and the next quartile, and the top. So what that looks like is a pyramid. What starts off at 50% drops to maybe 40%, which then drops to maybe 25%. And at the top 25% quartile, you might have, I don't know, 20% female, 80% men. So it completely switches. So this is where looking at that second aspect becomes very important. It's not enough to hire in women. They need career progression. You need to promote them. And to promote them, you need to have the culture and the processes in place to support their advancement. And this is where many organizations fall down.
You mentioned culture also playing a big role in that. And part of the culture, I think maybe resistance to change could also be cultural, an organizational culture. How do you address that? How do you go about changing culture for the better?
Yes, it's very difficult. So again, this is where the work of CMI comes in. The most important aspect for changing culture is line management behavior. What's line management behavior? We all have a boss. If you have a good boss creates good culture within their team. What do I mean by that? They listen to the people that work with them. They value them. They say thank you when a job is well done. They sit them down and have coaching career discussions, not once a year performance reviews. and they get to know their team members as people, and they allow them to fit their work commitments around their lives. That is the hallmark of an inclusive culture where everybody can thrive. They also do not expect you to be a mini-me, right? So Melisa is Melisa. She should not hire a bunch of Melisas to work for her, right? You cater to people's strengths. You look for strengths different from your own. When you do these things, you will be creating a culture whereby you will give women opportunity. But too often we don't do these things. And what does that look like? It looks like, oh, well, Melisa just had a baby. She won't know. She won't want that promotion. Well, how do you know? Have you asked Melisa? If you haven't, you're not doing your job as a line manager. So this is why culture is created by not just the behavior at the top, although that is extremely important. We all create culture every day.
How do you become a good line manager?
Well, we at CMI believe that line management is a skill that can be learned.
So that it becomes, so it's not just kind of accidental,
yes,
good, or the luck of the draw that you get a good boss. How do you become, how do you ensure that all your line managers are good line managers?
So I want to pick up on a word you used, accidental. So we describe CMI's mission. We've been around for 77 years, and we say that our mission is to take accidental managers and turn them into confident, competent leaders. Now, why is that important? Because most of us, and we know this in the UK, this is over 80% of managers promoted into managerial positions are accidental managers. Meaning, you're a great journalist, you're a great IT person, you're a great finance person. So one day, the boss taps you on the shoulder and says, congratulations, you're promoted. You're now responsible for the people, the team, the money. Good luck with that. And we don't train them. And we somehow expect by osmosis they're going to know what to do. But we don't know what to do because we've been a great finance person. We haven't led, managed a team, or we don't know how to motivate ourselves. We don't know the behaviors. And at CMI, we believe that management and leadership is a skill that can be learned with practice, like most other things. And this is how you create good bosses, inclusive leaders, that in turn create good culture.
Why are they so important? Why is it important that organizations invest in training or equipping their line managers with these skills?
So the reason it's so important, and there's some fascinating research on this, there's a couple of reasons. So firstly, did you know that the most important relationship you have at work is with your line manager? When you have a good relationship with your line manager, you feel challenged, supported, heard, you thrive. What happens when you thrive? You do better work. What happens when you do better work? Your organization gets better outcomes. Flip it. What happens when you have a bad line manager? You feel dispirited, devalued, despondent. It gets to your mental health and well-being. You go home, you complain to your other half about your problems at work. You might yell at your children more or be short-tempered. It has a huge impact on our mental well-being. It's actually the second largest impact outside of work on our mental health, our relationship with our line manager. It's incredibly important. So obviously, creating a good positive relationship through training line managers creates greater engagement, more satisfied employees that are going to produce more for your organization. So this makes beautiful business sense. And more organizations should realize it.
You mentioned there were two reasons. So it makes good business sense. But what else? What would be the argument for organizations to train leaders? Because usually it's kind of on-the-job training. Learn as you go. You'll figure it out. I did. You figure it out.
Yeah, no, don't muddle through, right? So this is sort of saying my experience is going to be your experience. That's never good. But the second reason, obviously we all are keen to attract and retain talent, right? You know, we've heard it all. We all have to compete for the best talent, right? Well, we've done some research that shows that if people have an ineffective line manager, over half, 52%, tell us, I'm going to leave in the next year. And of course, it's expensive to recruit and train people. It's expensive for organizations to constantly have an outflow because people don't feel valued. And again, if their line manager is treating them badly, eventually they will leave. That's what the research tells us. And the organization will find it very, very difficult to achieve their objectives. So it's about attracting and retaining talent as well as getting better outcomes.
Are organizations, are industries changing their approach to workplaces, not just gender-balanced workplaces, but gender-responsive leadership? And I'm wondering, have we reached a point, post-pandemic especially, where we're now willing to look at our workers, our employees, as people first, humans first, as opposed to kind of cogs in the machine?
It's a great question, and the enlightened employers most certainly are doing this, because COVID showed us a couple of very important things, all of which contribute to more inclusive workplaces. The first is we can work remotely. Those people working remotely were managing to run banks, right? Run major news operations, conduct board meetings, and all the people that were hugely skeptical pre-pandemic, all, especially the bosses that thought, you can't work at home, you're not working, you're skiving, you're knocking off, right? I don't trust you. That was absolutely paid to. People saw we could be very productive working from home. So that's the first myth. And the second thing that it created is you don't need to only hire people who you can see in front of you every day who live around the corner from your place of work, right? Suddenly, your access to talent was so much broader because you didn't have to have people only in your neighborhood, right? And then there is that other element which you mentioned. Bosses realized we're all human. Now, the employers that have kept that up demonstrated a huge relationship of trust. And we know from our research at CMI, the number one thing that people want is they want flexible working because it makes them feel valued and trusted. It goes back to my first story. I was having a family issue. My boss trusted me, allowed me to flex. I extended that trust to the people who worked for me, allowed them to flex. We got great results. This was a long time ago, but it's still true today. What is very counterproductive, I believe, is the bosses, and they exist everywhere in the world, who are saying, pandemic over, back in the office 5 days a week, full time. I'm going to measure your swipe card. I'm going to dock your bonus if you're not in the office 5 days a week. This is last century behavior, because we've proven we don't need to do that. At CMI, what we know works best is a blend. Of course, we're humans. We need social interaction. We need to see each other. But we also need that flexibility.
Has enough time passed from when we started to embrace remote work or hybrid work for us to think about whether or not there were unintended consequences of remote work? I think of maybe unconscious bias of not having proximity to bosses or leaders who value proximity. And more often than not, it's women who opt for remote work or need the flexible hours and may be held at a different standard when it comes to what bosses consider performance.
Yes, you've hit the nail on the head, Melissa. Very unfortunately, and there's a word for that, we call it presenteeism.
Presenteeism.
Okay? So that is unfortunately still very prevalent, and what it means is, I'm going to promote you because I can see you.
Yeah, you're here all the time.
Yes.
You must be working hard.
Exactly. And what people, the big mistake people make is to equate presenteeism with productivity.
Right.
So what we say at CMI is measure outputs, not face time. So it does not matter. You know, you could be the longest hours in the office and you could still have the least output. Good bosses will set clear objectives for their teams, and they will measure, are those teams and individuals achieving those objectives? Those are the people who should be rewarded. But far too often, and we've measured this, it's still over half of promotions, people believe, occur not because of outputs, but because of face time. You're in front of me, you must be working hard. You're the first in, the last to leave. You're always outside my office door. That does not mean that you are doing better work than your colleague who is at home. But sometimes that colleague working remotely gets left behind or forgotten about, even though they're doing excellent work.
So what is the future now? I mean, you work with organizations, provide this training, you hope to build an entire generation of, you know, good line managers. How do you achieve that vision? What is required so that we all go to work happy and empowered and passionate about what we're doing?
Well, I would love to say a miracle, but I'm not going to say that. This is incredibly important, but it is a conscious and intentional decision. So that would be my first requirement, is realize that better management and leadership really matters. It's good for your people. It's good for your organization. It's good for you, right? You know, when we manage our teams well, it improves our own well-being, right? So realize that, do you know that management and leadership drives, in many cases, over half of productivity gains. So it's a very simple way of improving any organization. So that's the first step. Realize how important it is. And then the second step is beware the accidental manager. Don't leave people to fend for themselves. Okay. I was very lucky, and when I started my career, I joined an organization that believed in training everybody in line management and leadership. And it produces great results and a better culture. So it's about that training. And the third point is keep learning, right? You're never the finished article. We have CEOs that become chartered managers. We are the only ones globally that can award chartered manager. And they tell me, you know, I really got a lot out of that because it made me reflect. It made me more self-aware about how my behavior impacts others, how I manage and lead. And that self-awareness and that ability to learn is a lifelong thing. So having said that you know, it's a continuous learning process. Having known all you know now, what did you wish you knew before? I guess I'm wondering if you could kind of equip your younger self with knowledge to be a good boss, a good manager. What would be the one thing that you would equip yourself with? What skill would you equip yourself with? So there are many skills, but I think the ability to listen, the ability to have empathy, communication, we know from all of our surveys, which means listening. Most people think communication is, I talked at you, I've communicated, that's it, right? Job done. But no, communication is not what you say, it's what does the other person hear? So really it's about when you're talking with people, instead of just saying, right, I've told you what to do, that's it. Say, okay, we talked about what I'd like you to do. Play it back to me. What did you hear? You'd be amazed at the amount of times that what gets played back to you is different from what you thought you said.
Wow. That's shocking and making me question conversations I've had before. So what is next for you, Anne, in the couple minutes that we have left? You're here in town in Malaysia, which is an important market for you. Where do you see Malaysia positioned in terms of in this leadership journey that that you're so passionate about?
So first I can say I do love coming to Malaysia. I first came to Kuala Lumpur in 2016 for CMI, the Chartered Management Institute. It's our most important international market. It's very welcoming. It's, I love that it's a very diverse but respectful community. And we work with 22 universities and 3 private training providers here. We're very proud of our presence in Malaysia and we want to nurture and grow it. I do believe that Malaysia appreciates the power of human capital, and I think you love to learn and love to educate yourselves, and I think those are great attributes upon which to build the kind of cultures we've been talking about.
And thank you for being on the show with me today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Melissa.
That's all we have for you on this episode of The Future is Female. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.